I think people kind of they have their head in the sand about technology and AI. I think it's only going to go one way. So I feel that speed potentially won't be a USP element for lenders in the mid to long term future, or even near, but I'm going to say mid. So AI definitely is going to be a huge changer. I don't know what this will mean. I just know that it will fundamentally change the market.
Welcome to the Property Funder podcast. I'm your host, Michael Dean. You can find me on the internet at property_funder. I'm here today with Beth Fisher, or Bethany Joe Fisher, if you find her on the socials. Beth is the managing director of MediaNet Publishing. Beth's been with MediaNet for 11 years, starting out as a journalist, on the beat, and working her way up now to top of the tree. I've known Beth for a long time. I have great admiration for her, and we obviously work together as an advertiser and sponsor of your various events. So, but Beth's a very interesting, charismatic individual with strong opinions. So I'm sure we will not be disappointed today. Beth, welcome. Most people are probably aware of it. I think a lot of people in business now, at least if you've been in business for a while, or the sales side of the business, sales and marketing, you'll be aware that media companies like your own, the events actually make up a huge proportion of the actual turnover of your businesses, doesn't it? Even though it might only be one, like the B&C Awards, the FP show, they might only be one day events, but they're actually huge cash cows for you as a business, even though the actual media side of it is what people see. The website, the website and the magazine. That's what they might see day in, day out. Yeah. But actually, it's the events are the things that that really make a lot of the turnover for the business.
Yeah.
How have you thought about trying to increase the number of events so that you can, to take advantage of that? But of course, there's obviously even more planning, because there's so much planning that goes into these things, right?
Yeah. So you're right. I wouldn't say it's more, but it's a good half of our turnover, both of those events. So really, like, our bread and butter, like if we're talking like 30 is FP show, B&C as a whole, like the magazine and the online website, and the awards.
Yeah.
And then the rest is made up of other titles, other smaller things that we do. So in terms of events, yes, we've just hired an extra events support person. I don't like the idea of thinking this makes money, let's just do loads of that, because I don't think that technically works. I think what works for us is the exclusivity of certain events, like the awards. I think if you had 2 of them or like more, I think it waters it down.
Yeah.
Same with the FP show. Unless we had like one that was in a different region, like up north, potentially. We have dabbled with that in the past. But I think it needs to be something completely different. And we try these things frequently, but there's one event which is going to be a huge event, and we would love to do that in the next 12 to 18 months. We would love to. It's a lot of planning though. So, and that'd be.
Can you say any more about it?
So it would be. I can't say a lot, but it would be a lot of people. It would be bigger than the FP show, but it wouldn't be that sort of thing.
Okay.
But it'd be a big event, and yeah, that is definitely something which we're really keen to do. I think we would be good at it as well.
Okay, all right. You can tell me more about it offline, off camera. Okay, and then I know you wanted to talk about the magazine as well. That's obviously something you feel very passionate about.
Yeah.
How do you see the growth of how do you see the growth and the evolution of the magazine continuing?
Yeah. So the magazine, obviously, the print magazines have always been, over the last like 10, 15 years, have struggled. It's been quite a dying industry. But I feel that if it's got a niche and it's got a specialism to it and it's beautifully designed, beautifully created, and has excellent high quality journalism, stories, columns, thoughts, whatever, it will do well. because people will want to pick it up and read it, and keep it as well. We've got some brokers who send pictures of all of their magazines stacked up in their office, which we think is really sweet, and it's definitely something which I would do, as you
definitely would.
yeah. So so we have we've it's been a really successful magazine since launch. It's growing in circulation and subscriber base each year, which is obviously what we want. So obviously our biggest thing is to continue growing that. We've got big targets each year on how much we want in terms of circulation, subscribers, and online readership to that digital version. And we want to build bigger partnerships as well. So like I was saying earlier, kind of moving into those pockets, estate agents, like areas where actually they probably would be interested in reading something like this. But they just aren't. They're more on the tertiary side. They're not like directly a broker, for example. So there's more of that which we want to grow into. We're really pushing the social media on the magazine. So you've probably seen that we're on TikTok, which I always enjoy watching, but it's not really my bag. I prefer Instagram. I'm a millennial, so
likewise, yeah.
But we've got Gen Z in the team now.
Yeah,
slay.
I can't say that with a straight face.
They come up with brilliant ideas, like the younger people we've got in the team. So they've been amazing at like really bringing the magazine, different elements of what we do into the spotlight. So social media has been excellent. But the magazine, we will continue to innovate. The biggest change we've had this year is that we want to pivot the magazine more into the magazine for the industry, written by the industry, read by the industry. So even though we've got excellent journalism in there, the cover story, the interviews, the zeitgeist of the industry, we also are like really cherry picking the best commentators in the market to write columns.
Thought leadership,
and we don't have any PR in our magazine. It's very much like, we want you to write about this, this and this, or if they've told us off record, or like, this really irritates me in the market, blah blah, can you write a piece on this? Can you, even if it's something which they want to do anonymously, we're really getting those thoughts of the market, and it's gone down really well.
Well, don't worry, I've got a few axes to grind, so I'll give you some ideas.
Please do.
First, you've got some lawyers, some valuers, and some MSs in the crosshairs for sure on the back of back of some of that. Some LinkedIn posts have been very effective, but get it in the B&C magazine. That's going to be a completely different level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I love that. I love the honesty that people have, and that's what makes it. That's what people want to read about anyway. They love a gripe, and I see it on LinkedIn all the time. I just find that some of the posts are amazing, and some of the comments, I'm just like, this is great. We want a bit more of that in the magazine. That's been quite a bit of a change since like end of last year. We've just got really talented people in the team. Like, they're so creative, and that's one of our biggest culture points, like creativity in whatever you do, whether it's sales, journalism, marketing, finance, whatever it is, you need to be really creative. So that's just hugely important for us.
How do you strike that balance though, with when you're as trade press, between being journalists but also not biting the hand that feeds you as well? When you, let's just say you get told something negative about someone, a client, on the one hand you want to be an objective journalist, but the other hand you're like, but without them I can't keep the lights on. So how do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult, a difficult conversation to have, and it's why I would separate myself from the journalism side now, as I'm commercial. So I leave it's all down to the editorial team, and I have to leave them to their best judgment. So we, as you know, we hear like a lot of things in the market. 9 times out of 10, they're not true. Or it's like, it's maybe the beginning of something, but it's not actually like a fully fledged thing. But we hear a lot, we get a lot of tip-offs. We get a lot of people like saying, oh, have you heard about this? Or like just in conversation, because we go to every event, we network a lot. We like to meet every new company, new broker, new business. So we are, our ears are to the ground. But the best thing to do, especially if it is like someone who there is a commercial aspect to, and the editorial team will tell me like, I'm working on this story, like I've heard this, blah, blah, blah. I would normally just have a conversation with them. I would just say, look, I've heard this. What's going on? And normally, because I have a good relationship with that person or that business, we'd normally have a very open and frank conversation, and they wouldn't take it wouldn't take it negatively as like me just trying to get something out of them, get a story out of them. It's more like, look, there's obviously a rumour mill happening, so you should probably be at the forefront of it and actually just say it from your perspective. Sometimes it's not true, and that's fine. At least some journalists will just go ahead with whatever someone said that's a rumor. That's not our stance.
No.
We make sure that what we're running is completely accurate, and we're happy to run it. And it doesn't matter if they're a client or not. Like, we have to be genuinely happy. Also, we have to be happy that our audience would want to read that sort of story as well. They want to know what's going on in the industry. If someone's funding is pulled out, they're going to want to know. Brokers want to know. But it's also, are we getting a balanced view on it? So even though brokers want to know, we need to also talk to the lender on like why this is the case, what's happening. So it doesn't really affect us, and I get it. That's always the case. Like, bite the hand that feeds you. Blah, blah. I don't see it in that way. I see it as more of like, we're still like a strong partner with all of our clients, and we'll work with you. And the editorial team are fantastic at what they do, and they'll run something which is completely objective.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good approach to take. You obviously see, you see this sort of, particularly other lenders that kind of burn very bright. The Lendies of this world, and burn very bright, and then collapse, and then you see, there's plenty of lenders have come and gone, haven't they, in the last sort of 10, 15 years, and at least since it's more than 15 years now since MediaNet started. So, and then you've got the kind of your TU scandals, and some brokers being a bit naughty, or borrowers being a bit naughty. So you've always got to find that. You've always got to find that balance, haven't you? To being mindful about the fact that they're clients, or they might be important, prominent names in the industry, but also not. But you have to say what the truth is, and you have to report on what's going on. But it's just how you approach it. I think that's normally the difference. It's and if something is happening in the market which shouldn't be happening, then that's probably not a client we want to work with anyway. No, exactly. In terms of the future of MediaNet, is there are there new titles that you're thinking about releasing, or are there any acquisition targets for the company where maybe there are some smaller titles, smaller brands that that might be might be synergistic for you? Is that something you think about very often? Yeah,
I wouldn't say very often, but it is something we think about. This year's probably our best year in business that we've had in 15 years.
Fantastic.
Which is amazing. And we're always looking at how we can grow steadily. We don't want to go crazy. There's always different opportunities, whether it's partnerships, acquisition, or launching new areas, like Buy to Let Insider. We only launched that 18 months ago. We launched it as an online title and a magazine. We launched it at the worst time period ever because it was when the buy to let market was just like so obviously support for that is not going to be the highest, but the online side of the magazine, because the online news website, it did so well because it was a time where brokers needed to know what was going on in buy to let. So there was a lot of content on there, and the readership was surged. So that did really well. So we just decided after a year just to fold the magazine for a while, potentially bring it back later, but print's expensive. So if you don't have support initially for it, it's you can keep pushing it if you want, but I like to make a decision quickly rather than prolong something and be like, look, that's just, it's not going to work right now. And that's fine. I don't take that as a failure. I take that as a lesson. But the online website's done really well. So we're probably going to have a bit more focus on buy to let. I find that market really interesting. We haven't got any plan to launch a new title. I feel like you can spread yourself too thin. And I think you should focus on what you do well, and what we do well is our 3 titles, and B and C being the flagship. So I'd actually want to invest more money into more increased journalism. So either freelance work or building the team up even further. So so that's what I would like to put more time and effort into.
Okay, that's really cool. You mentioned Buy to Let Insider. I still have so many questions, but you mentioned Buy to Let Insider and Buy to Let Market. Is Buy to Let dead?
I don't think so. I just think it's a very different market to what it used to be, and it's just more professional, and it's just looked at in a completely different way. And there's I feel like specialist brokers are needed more now than they ever have been, but I feel that the very kind of everyone was kind of launching a buy-to-let product, and it was like a 2-year product or a 3-year product. It was like that kind of bridge product. I don't feel like that's a big market. I think that's just I think it's a small space where I don't think it should be highly competitive. But in terms of buy-to-let, I feel that there is a space there for lenders that have great products and great service. So no, I don't think it's dead.
No,
just very different market.
I think the buy-to-let market's definitely changing, and I think that we're not going to see interest rates go back to 0.5% anytime soon. Probably could be 20, 30 years before we ever see it anywhere near there. Who knows? I could be completely wrong. Not the best maker of predictions, I'd say. But I think in that environment, you have to, in that interest rate environment, it's quite interesting as from a lender's perspective, on the sort of the development and refurb side, that there's still appetite, but I think that the direction of travel is much more HMO conversions, because they just yield more. Or, projects, in the past we used to be a bit allergic to the north, and now I sort of joke with Zaher, and I say, look, actually you like the north now, don't you? Because the yields work, and you can actually do a viable buy-to-let exit. Whereas London and South East, it's it's a bit more tricky. Which I guess for those avocado eating Gen Zers who wanted to get in the housing market in the southeast of London, it's good news, but a bit less competition from buy-to-let investors. But on the other hand, but it's interesting from a lender's perspective, that's for sure. Yeah,
it is, and I think it's definitely made lenders relook at their offerings, because I think there was a point in time of the last 2-3 years, I think every lender was looking at buy-to-let.
Yeah, the funny thing is that that it's something that's kind of been available to us, but we never really lent into it. And I think ultimately, I feel like you've got to focus. If you're in specialist finance, you are in specialist finance. You need to specialize. And I think some of our competitors who are worried that maybe have lost their way. Don't get me wrong, like it's been a challenging couple of years for us as well, right? It's not been a bed of roses. But I feel like where a lot of competitors maybe sometimes lose their way is they try to expand their product offering and spread themselves too far, and they're not sufficiently specialist, and then they start to lose the essence of what they really are and what they stand for. You look at, some of the lenders who started out as bridge lenders and then tried to become banks. And then, of course, they had to pivot into buy-to-let and into regulated mortgages because that's, that was easier to fund on their balance sheets and blah, blah, blah. But I think they're just their whole product offering, everything that made them great in the beginning just kind of fell by the wayside. And actually, I think for a lot of these the competitors, people who actually I have a lot of admiration for, actually the buy-to-let market, that what I call a fringe buy-to-let market, where you're basically lending to people with weird credit profiles or whatever. Because that became so expensive, so unviable, actually it was maybe a blessing in disguise for them that it forced them to go back to sticking to the things that they were really good at.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Well, we've seen it in the bridging market. Like, when I joined in 2014, beginning of 2014, like the majority of the market was private, institutionally backed, private family money, whereas now it's like probably 3/4 of the market is institutionally backed.
Yeah.
And that does change how brokers it's better competitively and it's better professionally, but I feel like brokers have too much choice but also less choice at the same time because the products are very similar. So I find it's quite difficult for brokers to keep up with like who to go to, what products are out there, what USPs people have, because everyone says the same USP.
Speed, right?
Speed, service. Yeah, exactly. Price. We love helping people with their marketing.
Yeah.
When they come to, I'm like, so what's your USP? And they're like, speed, price. Cool. So you need to have something that's different. And I feel that now, like something which was very prevalent when I joined the market, is now a real USP to have your own money, to have your own funding. That's something which brokers always ask when I talk to them, like, do you know any new lenders? And I'll like talk about people I've like had conversations with recently. Are they backed by their own money? Do they make their own decisions? That's like one of the first questions they ask. I think that's changed a lot in the bridging space, where that used to be like the real USP, whereas now it's kind of not.
I think like the vast majority of the established players in the market are funded by the same dozen sources of funding. I say dozen, but pretty much every other lender is funded by Shawbrook or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's just that's definitely not secret. The depth of capital is great, but it is great in one way, but we do ultimately run the risk of being, distribution vehicles for those lenders. And I think that in this, what I would call a slightly risk-off environment from a funding perspective, and it's challenging as a lender that is, we are principally a refurbishment and development lender. But if you look at where if you go to ABS in Barcelona every year, the last few years, the only thing that anyone ever wants is we just want bridging, we want resi bridging, we want live refurb. And you go, okay, fine. But the problem with that is that you then have, if every single lender in the space who has access to the sort of the mainstream of the institutional capital, you just end up with a situation where pretty much everyone is offering exactly the same thing. And so for us, the thing that the funders that we have in place, and we've obviously been working with for 8 years or more, in addition to our own private resources, which are not, which obviously as you get bigger, your pot of private capital is a certain size, and as you get bigger, that just becomes increasingly irrelevant to the rest of the funding. But the thing that we prize over anything else is the funding that gives us something different to the rest of the market. Because otherwise, it's like, yes, I can offer you bridging at X per month, and I can pay you, Mr. Broker, your 2% and whatever, right? But there's not a lot left. At the end of the day, there's not a lot left to do it, and so it's very marginal business, and you've got to, if you want to work in the bridging space, you've got to accept all of the, you've got to accept, good, bad, and the ugly from the brokers that give you any volume, and actually that's not necessarily, in many ways we'd rather let other people have that business, and we can actually focus on the stuff that is specialist, that where we can actually add value, we can do something different, like some of the stuff that we're doing at the moment, it is a bit more unique. But it's really interesting to hear you say that, from your position, which is it's the sort of uniformity of the market. And because I was going to ask you, like, how do you feel? We'll ask a follow-up question anyway, which is like, aside from that sort of, that sort of almost monoline funding that the market has got in the specialist market, what are the other changes you've observed over the last 11 years?
I feel there's a lot more, especially on the journalism side. So not talking about the market specifically, but I remember when I first started, and there were few and far between stories. So there weren't that many PR companies. There weren't that many like brokers definitely wouldn't be sending press releases or stories in. It'd mainly be the big banks or the larger bridging lenders. And normally you'd have to be chasing them for certain things. So it's probably more creative. But now, like, we're just inundated with stories, just so, like, hundreds of stories a day, and you're just like, and then people are like, oh, why didn't you run that tiny case study?
Yeah.
It's like, well, I've had about 50 of those.
With PR press release, senior BDM opens an envelope. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and we always get that lender lends money. Yeah. So we always look at, like, why would a broker care? Have they given us like a story which actually shows a case which is quite unique and maybe would help a broker who's got a similar case, or an acquisition. We hear about a lot of the stories first, which is why people come to us, because we generally break the majority of the stories in this space. So we're always kind of sitting on stories as well. So we know things that are going to happen in a few months' time. We know launches, like the Mast Haven story, for example. Knew that for quite a while. There's we do love to work, especially new businesses when they're launching. That's probably our bread and butter. We love to work with young businesses or businesses that have only been around for a bit and they've never marketed, and like really like following their journey. I mean, we did the same with you guys. Like we worked with you from quite early on. So.
That's true, yeah.
And we love that. We love that sort of thing, and we love staying with a client for a long time, or following a company's journey, whether they're not a client, whether they're a client or not. It's so interesting, and to see how those companies evolve.
Yeah, I mean, because I always think of that lady in Bristol when they I think Theresa May announced an election, and she's not another one, and so every time a new, I see a press release about a new lender, and I'm like, I always think of that Brenda from Bristol.
I love that.
but the irony is, like, I think for a lot of the irony is, I think for a lot of for lenders, I don't mind the competition, to be honest with you, because having built our way up to where we are now, highs and lows, I know it's it's a difficult road, and to go from that kind of, I think pretty much anyone can lend 10, 20 million a year in the first couple of years. It's how do you get to 100? How do you get to 200 and beyond? That's the hard bit, because that's the hard bit, I think, particularly if you're doing in granular basis. Yeah,
I mean, you'll see in the latest B&C mag that will come out this week, so I assume this will come out afterwards, so that's fine, because it's not anywhere else. We do obviously the EY bridging annual report every year, and so that's always exclusive to the mag. So the interesting figure, I don't know the exact figure at the top of my head, but the loan book to I think 100 to 150 or 100 to 200 million pounds a year, that bridging lender size has reduced year on year. So I don't know what that means for the market. It's either because the larger loan book hasn't increased, So it's obviously either those lenders have kind of fallen away or they've just not been lending as much. So there could be a multitude of reasons.
I find the reporting on, I find the statistical reporting very hard to follow, in the sense of that I'm, and if I was being unkind, I think some people report utter bullshit in some of the survey data, because I actually think that I think something like the EY report I tend to have a bit more credibility of. But for example, one of the trade organisations that we're a member of and that we report into every quarter, you would think that you would think that we were in a zero gravity environment, the way that it seems to just grow quarter on quarter. But so you see, so we and our peers are reporting. I feel like we're reporting honestly, and it's not a bed of roses. It's challenging, right, to do business. And you phone up your peers, fellow founders and CEOs, and you go, how's it going?
Are you also struggling?
And you kind of go, it's like that meme. It's like shit. Everyone's like going shit. And then you see the stats and they go,
yeah, biggest loan books ever.
So what you're saying about the EY stuff makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah,
makes perfect sense to me. But it just frustrates the hell out of me that people are maybe not necessarily being as honest with their reporting in some of the outlets.
That's why I love having honest conversations about the market, because you get it all the time. Like, how's business? Oh yeah, it's great. I had best quarter ever. And sometimes you're like, have you? That's not what I've heard.
Yeah.
But who I really like is Chris from Attilia.
He did a very good LinkedIn post today, just on my way over. It made me laugh. Yeah,
brilliant post. And I think it was either the one this morning or yesterday. I can't remember when I read it, but it might be the same one you're talking about like the real genuine like look of the market and like how the last year's panned out. And that is, I've always had an honest conversation with him, and I just feel like that is really kind of where the market that is where the market is and has been, especially for the development space. Development market's been really challenging over the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's really hard because if you're a developer, it's really hard to make sites stack up. So it doesn't take much for for a deal to get derailed, and as a consequence of that, you could spend months working on a development financing deal, and then we are just a service provider, and the client will just go, I'm pulling out, or it's on ice, or I've tried to renegotiate the deal with the vendor, and it's it is really challenging. And I think one of the other things is, I think is probably a bit underreported is which is not feedback, but you can choose to do with this information what you want. There are a number of our peers who have had massive capital haircuts on their loan books and taken quite big hits, to the extent that we potentially have a deal coming on our desk because a very well-known South Coast lender were waiting on a new funding line to come into place, which has been delayed, and they've and effectively not been able to bring about a refi for someone we know. So it's quite likely it's because their funding line, the new funding line, has looked at the massive hit that they've taken on the balance sheet and gone, maybe we need to have a second think about whether we want to be supporting these people. And look, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't say we've operated the cleanest book, but we still 10 years in still haven't had a capital loss. Some might say that actually that's probably, we're probably not lending enough and not taking enough risk. And I would actually probably accept that criticism. Actually, we probably need to take a bit more risk. But it is interesting. But going back to the point where you've got to have these real conversations.
Yeah, but it's also what you define as success.
Yeah.
Every business defines success in different ways. Some people define success as volume. Or turnover, but shouldn't it be profitability?
I mean, as a business that has been, I think, pretty much profitable to a decent degree in almost every one of the years of our existence, I would be inclined to agree with that. But at the same time, I actually think, like you said, it's kind of the definition of success is in the eye of the beholder. Mm-hmm. For me, I personally just feel like that's success really is just progress, just being that bit better every day or every month or every year. I don't necessarily feel like I feel like we're sort of getting back on track, but I feel like the last couple of years having been very difficult at a broad level, for the environment has been really challenging. I think sometimes you can lose your way, and I don't feel like you don't feel like you've got that momentum going. Even though we'll continue to report, 7-figure profits and all the rest of it, it's like, that doesn't feel that real to me. I'm not I don't necessarily measure my success by the number of zeros per se. It's a bit more intrinsic for me. I think you're probably of a similar ilk, right? Which is that actually, do you feel good?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like if you're already in the position where you are profitable, then you can probably look towards that. Yeah. But I agree. It's about like changing perceptions, like being something that's very different and helpful, that market hasn't seen or has accessed before. So. Yeah.
What would you say your big predictions are for if we look at the next 5 to 10 years in the specialist finance market?
5 to 10 years.
Let's be honest, no one's going to hold you to it. But if you're going to make a wild speculative guess as to where, what you think the specialist finance market as we know it is now, how do you think it, could you see, what changes could you see that would be quite material?
I mean, I think the use of AI is going to be, I think people kind of they have their head in the sand about technology and AI. I think it's only going to go one way. So I feel that speed potentially won't be a USP element for lenders in the mid to long term future, or even near, but I was going to say mid. So AI definitely is going to be a huge changer. I don't know what this will mean. I just know that it will fundamentally change the market. The bridging, I feel like it's kind of over the past 10 years has become more of a mainstream product, but it's still not mainstream. It's definitely not mainstream, but it has become more in line with that. And I feel like that will continue on that trajectory. I feel like development will always be a very specialist product, but there'll be better innovations with technology that will come in place. We've seen stuff being created in the market to help with, a lot of contractors going bust. There are a lot more payment methodologies and fintechs coming in to try and alleviate that. I feel like that will help assist that market. So that should be interesting, but also just where we are politically and the fact that we don't have enough housing, that's always going to be a focus. Just depends on whether or not I feel like a lot of the proposals and funding that's put in place for new planning officers and trying to alleviate the planning backlogs at the moment, I don't feel it's going to make a huge difference at all. I don't think it's going to make really a difference, but only time will tell. But I feel like a big change is going to need to happen. And then there'll be an area for a bit of a boom in development. But yeah, bridging, I feel like there's going to be more acquisition. We've been saying this for years. There has
definitely happen, yeah.
Yeah, and there has to be acquisition. And I feel like there'll be more, the larger banks acquiring bridging lenders so they can have their own arm, especially as there's more competition with challenger banks, gives them a bit more of an edge. And yeah, I feel like there has to be some sort of M&A in that space.
I think that I feel like I'm a bit of a broken record because I agree with you on that M&A side. And I was going to ask you about that anyway. The there's probably going to be more Alicas acquiring more Tuscans in the space, right? You know,
But you can't have loads of that type of lender. It doesn't work.
I mean, the downside for you is that there are few people to take tables and take slots. So that's why you need your fresh meat coming into the market.
You do need the fresh stuff. But saying that, like the size of like a lender that's acquiring, you know, multiple businesses, they become much bigger and they end up taking 3 tables.
Yeah, that's true. They've got bigger budgets, right?
They got bigger budgets, so it really depends. But yeah, obviously the worst situation is if those lenders don't get bought out or acquire and they just fall by the wayside. Like saying with like loan books, the way they've got, you know, big red mark against a certain portfolio of loans or whatever the case is, and they fall by the wayside. That's shrinking of the market. That's not good for the industry. So.
I agree with that. Like I've always liked to be a net promoter of the wider industry, and I don't like to punch down or punch sideways on on any competitors, because I feel like, you know, we rise. It's one of those things where we need to sort of pull each other up. We rise together rather than bickering and going, you know, sort of bitching about each other, because it's a small market, and actually we all exist in it. We can coexist, you know, in a way that, provided that we all serve our own little niches, and actually what I do or what I specialize in, John or Craig or Jemima or whoever does something else better, right? And so they're gonna, you know, we need, you know, and so they'll refer stuff to me and I'll refer stuff to them. You know, and so it's not. It can be quite symbiotic. You just have to be very collaborative, a very collaborative space. So, and ultimately, my view has always been, the bigger the specialist finance market is, the more investable the specialist finance market is, which means there's more institutional capital that comes into it. There's more opportunities that will come out of it. You know, more institutional capital means money. I mean, we obviously talked about the restriction. You know, the institutional capital can be more restrictive, but there's lots of different types of institutional capital. And some of that institutional capital has a higher risk, higher risk appetite, which means that it can do more quirky, more interesting stuff, and open more doors for clients, which is ultimately, you know, it's beneficial, right?
Out of interest, where is that type of institutional capital with the higher risk appetite coming from? Is that normally overseas, or? I
would say this anyway, because most of our capital is American, but the biggest pool of capital more broadly is American, right? But if you talk to private equity companies, right, or private equity companies or hedge funds or whatever, right, you know, the amounts of money that we lend in a year, they're investing that amount of cash in a day. Right, as in one of us would, you know, a lot of the people they're investing that in a day. You know, they'll say, look, we don't get out of bed for less than 50 million quid or 100 million quid. You go, right, well, it'll take me X months to, it's going to take me a few months to build up a loan book that I can sell to you. That's, you know, that's of the size that's worth you putting the money into. So, you know, so again, these funders need to, you know, these funding partners, they need a market that of scale to make it worth them going into. So the bigger that market is, the better. But they've got the appetite. They've got the appetite to take the risk, but they need, you know, they need a portfolio of opportunities to buy into, because otherwise they just can't afford the time to go into the granular detail on all these loans. This is the way it is.
Would that, do you see that their appetite changing as a result of what we were discussing right at the beginning with the tariffs and how the stock market's changing over there?
Yeah, it was funny. It was when I was watching the Trump with his little sandwich board announcing the tariffs on Newsnight. I was like, fuck, what is this? What does this mean? So then I imagine I'm not alone. So I typed into ChatGPT, right, what does this mean for us? How's this going to affect me? And I think, obviously, you know, what we do isn't currently subject to tariffs, so that's fine. At least as far as our American partners. I mean, I might get a nasty surprise, but I don't think it does. Not directly. I think in terms of the flow of capital, you know, you could easily, like you can see a less volatile market like the UK being relatively attractive to investors than the US. You know, if the US has, if the US sees a spike in inflation because of the tariffs and blah, 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 and then that has a negative impact on the housing market. It means that credit, the credit is less secure and blah, blah, blah. You can make an argument for us being net beneficiaries. To be honest, I think it kind of comes out in the wash. I think it's about the same. I don't think that I don't think there's any kind of natural dissuasion on investment, particularly in credit products, from, say, a country like the UK by Americans. I don't think the US government is like, no, we don't want that. I'm sure they're pretty happy to be taking a nice, high single digit, double digit returns from, non-regulated bridge lending. I'm sure they'll be very happy with that.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong. You just don't know. You
Yeah.
don't know. But yeah, will be fun times.
It'll be interesting to see. I'm fascinated about what your prediction is for the next 10 years.
Well,
in the bridging space.
I think I was fascinated by your responses. Your comment around AI, I think, is really good. Is really well made. We're already building AI into our product, into our products, but like into our processes. I think by the end of the year we will be kind of, as a business, semi-automated from end to end. Which
include underwriting.
Including underwriting, yeah. I mean, so we've built effectively a valuation analysis tool. So you input a Redbook valuation into this parser, and then sort of spits out like all the key information and does an analysis on the comps and blah blah blah, and then you can compare it to what you thought at when you first made the offer, and then it feeds in. We have automated credit papers, and it's like a whole thing.
Is this something you've built, or as a
we
tech?
built it? Yeah, I mean,
Right.
we built it, and we did engage with our former ops director engaged with a tech company to build something for us. It wasn't, unfortunately, it just wasn't fit for purpose. It kind of coincided up with me and Zahir learning how to code. And by the way, like, we are like a true vibe coders. Like, I'm a true vibe coder. Like, I basically use ChatGPT to do most of the coding for me. That's why we have a dedicated tech team for all this stuff. And we were just like, look, we looked at the prototype. We were like nearly near the point of like finishing. We were nearly kind of at the point where we had to sort of make a decision as to whether we would kind of hand over. We'd give the AOK that we were happy with the product to the developer, and we were just like, no, this isn't fit for purpose. And we spent like a lot of money on it, and we're just like, look, let's just stick this in the bin and let's just start again. And like, so we now built. We wouldn't have owned that code either. We own all of our code. We've written it all ourselves. We own the copyright to it. We have this valuable IP, and we're building code that we think can. That can be white labeled and could be rolled out to the rest of the market. I actually think that so in one of the predictions I might have around the use of AI, or just the use, broader use of technology, is that I could see, considering how most of the market is funded, I could actually see funders bypassing what I would call originators. We are effectively an originator, right? Originator services like ourselves. I could see funders bypassing us and going directly to brokers, and brokers are a bit. I don't know how familiar you are with like the American model, right? But a lot of effectively brokers have just become lenders, right? Because you have the funding partners, you fund people well.
Yeah.
They will fund someone who's ostensibly a broker, and they've just become an originator. But the bar for someone to become an originator can be lowered, because you say to them, right, here's a software tool, and if you follow all the steps in this software tool, at the end of it will be, will be a nice golden
pot
egg.
of cash.
Yeah, a nice pot of cash that you can hand to a developer. So I definitely think you could see a world where you have this really super distributed model for funding. Now there'll always be that always work much better in bridging, I think, in the development space. So obviously before everyone in my company decides to leave, there will always be a
human element.
There will always, I think, in development or things that are more specialist, you need more. You need that experience, that human capital that that requires that experience and nuance that is a bit less required in bridging. But you could see it. I mean, it'll probably be wrong. As with most predictions, it's probably nonsense. But it's certainly something I could see happening going forward. So there's definitely, as always, there's interesting times ahead. And then by the same token, we could be sat here in 5 years from now and be like, pretty much everything's the same.
Nothing's happened.
and like for all ChatGPT and all the rest of it, like here we are now, like nothing. If anything, we've got slower, haven't we? The lending has got slower since in the 10 years since we started.
Yeah,
it's harder and slower to do a deal.
Yep.
Even the most simple deal takes, like brokers will now rant online and be like, I had lunch with a broker, lovely guy, like very sophisticated guy, does some challenging commercial deals as well. And he said to me, he's like, mate, bridge lenders are slower than banks these days. And I was like, oh, come on. He's like,
it's not that bad.
and he's like, no. And actually, then I look at some of the progress of some of our transactions, right? And it's like, and look, we can operate really fast, but all the stakeholders, your valuers, your MSs, your lawyers, they are so slow.
What's changed to make that? Because when I remember, let's say 2014, it was, 10, 11 years ago, it was, I remember like a lender that was around at the time, not now, but very famously said a loan that takes more than 3 days to complete is not a bridging loan.
I'm pretty sure you had a headline of that, right?
Yeah, and then now it's like 50 days average, 46, something like that, 50 days average.
You see that in bridging trends, right? So it's, you think, God, but that is the reality. I think that's not that far from reality. And you can probably do a term loan. Term loans are also like pulling teeth, but you could do a term loan in theory in about the same amount of time as it would take to do a bridging loan, like genuinely. And I don't know what it's driving it, but like when you get a valuer who turns around to them and goes, I can't get out and inspect for 2 weeks, and then I'm going to need another week, maybe 2 weeks to turn around my report. No, what the fuck? Seriously, this is not service. This is utterly ridiculous. So then you got a valuer who turns around and goes, I can get on site in 2 days or 3 days. You're like, please, I want more of this. I want more of this. Unfortunately, but then the flip side is, those guys will go out in 2 days. They then cover their arses by like coming in like 20% lower than the borrower's GDV or the market value. And you're like, well done. Congratulations. Go and collect your $2,000 or $2,500 for your valuation report. You've just blown up the deal. We don't make any money. The client doesn't make any money. The fuck is the point of this?
Yeah.
So it's
and then you can't get hold of that valuer because then everyone's heard that they can do it in 2-3 days.
And the best bit, Beth, and we're gonna have to wrap this up in a second. But the best bit is like, and then you can't get hold of anyone on a Friday because no one works Fridays anymore.
Of course,
it's just bloody ridiculous.
That's why we run charity news on a Friday. Fluff Friday.
Right, Beth, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed that.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
I'm going to do the closing tradition, which is if you could tell your younger self something, give yourself some advice, some self-talk, knowing about yourself or knowing what you do now, what would you tell to your younger self and why?
God, that's really difficult. What would I tell my younger self? That it's okay to think about things in a different way to other people, to be a bit different. I've always felt like a little bit different, but I feel like that's a good thing now. And to lean into that as much as possible, because it makes you stand out and makes you come up with different ideas that maybe other people wouldn't think of. Yeah, it's probably that.
That's definitely on brand. Yeah. Definitely on brand. Beth Fisher, it's been an absolute pleasure. Where can people find you on the internet? Where can people find, if they're not subscribed to Bridging Commercial?
Yeah.
How do they get subscribed? How do they connect?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn at Bethany Fisher, or please do subscribe to our B&C magazine, which you can find on bridgingcommercial.co.uk. We've got all of our products on there, online, digital, got the lender index, we've got links to all of our events, the awards, the shows, so you can find it all on B&C, bridgingcommercial.co.uk.
Brilliant. And I've been Michael Dean. I'm at property_funder on the internet. Please do get in touch. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for listening. We'll chat to you again on the next one. Thanks and bye-bye.